The Bible talks about giants and the descendants of giants having lived in the biblical land in ancient times.
Something has been unearthed, quietly, almost accidentally, in the forgotten corners of our planet. A discovery so strange that most archaeologists refuse to speak of it in public, and those who do are quickly silenced. In the remote mountain ranges of Asia and the deserts of the north, researchers have stumbled upon formations that defy reason. Enormous rocks carved not by wind nor water, but by something that once had flesh. The patterns are unmistakable. Layers that look like skin and sinew, folds like muscles, and deep fissures that resemble veins turned to stone. At first glance, these are mountains, but when viewed from above, they take the unmistakable shape of something once alive, the remains of a colossal being frozen in time. And suddenly, the ancient words of Scripture return to us. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4.
Legend has it that it is the flesh of petrified giants. Because it was not suitable to exist in the New Age, God destroyed them, and they turned to stone.
For centuries, theologians have debated what those words truly meant. Were they metaphor or memory? Were these mighty men only symbols of fallen kings? Or were they the physical offspring of an unholy union between heaven and earth? And if they were real, what became of their bodies? The flood that covered the world should have erased all trace of them. Yet, from the heart of the Himalayas to the plains of the Middle East, the earth itself seems to be whispering another story. One written not in ink, but in stone. Mountains shaped like faces. Caverns veined with colors like blood. Salt beds that gleam faintly in the dark, as if holding within them the memory of life. It is as though creation itself is remembering what humanity has forgotten. The day judgment fell upon the flesh of giants. Could it be that these mountains of stone are not mere geological wonders, but silent witnesses to the world before the flood? That what we now call landscape was once life itself? And if that is true, if what the Bible recorded as divine punishment still lies beneath our feet, then perhaps the greatest secret of all is not that these giants once lived, but that we have been walking upon their remains all along. When mountains remember high in the shadow of the Himalayas, there are places where the earth bleeds red, not from lava, nor from clay, but from salt. A salt so vividly crimson that when light touches it, it glows like living flesh. Locals call it the salt of the mountains. Scientists call it Himalayan pink salt, born from the pressure of ancient seas. But to the eyes of those who believe, it looks like something far older, something once alive, now entombed within the crust of the world. Each slab cut from those mountains reveals layers, pale white, then deep red, then veins of translucent crystal, like frozen blood. Miners describe the sight as unsettling. To them, it is as if they are carving into something sacred, peeling away the skin of the earth itself. And when light strikes the exposed surface, it shines with a strange softness, as though a breath still lingers beneath the stone. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Genesis 19:26. That verse, brief and mysterious, has long stood as a warning. To defy God's command is to be turned into memory itself, flesh transformed into judgment. If the wife of Lot could be reduced to a monument of salt for a single glance of disobedience, what then of the Nephilim, the offspring of rebellion, the fusion of angel and mortal that defiled the order of creation? Perhaps their punishment was far more severe. Perhaps their bodies were not merely destroyed, but sealed. Because in these mountains, the resemblance is undeniable. Every ridge looks like the fold of muscle. Every fissure mirrors the grain of flesh. From a distance, they are mountains, but up close, they look like the anatomy of titans. Some call it coincidence. Others call it proof. And perhaps both are true. For the earth does not forget. It remembers. Deep within the crust of these ranges, geologists have found salt beds that stretch for miles, compacted under unimaginable pressure, as if countless tons of living matter were crushed in an instant. Could this have been the moment when the heavens opened and the waters fell? When judgment descended upon those who walked the earth as gods? The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Genesis 6:13. These words, spoken before the great flood, were not poetic. They were precise. The end of all flesh, not merely the death of humanity, but the eradication of corrupted bloodlines, the purging of what should never have been. If the Nephilim were the embodiment of that corruption, their destruction would have been swift and absolute. Yet the earth, in its silence, became their tomb. And over thousands of years, water, wind, and fire hardened their remains into what we now call mountains. Geologists see strata. Prophets see judgment. There is a strange beauty in that, the collision of science and scripture, of evidence and eternity. Because while science dissects what it sees, prophecy listens to what it remembers. Stand before a cross-section of Himalayan salt, and you will see what words cannot describe. Fibrous tissue fossilized into mineral veins, the same patterns found in living muscle. When held under light, they shimmer like veins beneath skin. It is as if the mountain itself still carries the memory of something that once breathed. How does lifeless salt mimic the symmetry of flesh so perfectly? How do geological formations mirror the shape of bone, tendon, and marrow? Coincidence or divine reminder? Perhaps, in His judgment, God turned the flesh of rebellion into salt, so that the earth itself would bear witness, generation after generation, to the cost of defying heaven. For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Genesis 3:19. But for those who were not born of dust, those whose origin was celestial rebellion, perhaps dust was not enough. Perhaps they returned to stone instead. And as time passed, humanity forgot. Forgot that what they mined for salt might once have been the remnants of something that called itself divine. Forgot that the world beneath their feet was a cemetery older than history. Today, we build temples on these mountains. We carve tunnels through them, light candles upon them, never realizing that the very ground that supports us might once have been the body of a being that fell from grace. The difference lies in how one sees. Science observes, but faith remembers. And somewhere deep beneath the frozen salt and rock, the earth still holds the echo of that first rebellion. The moment heaven wept, and the sons of God fell to the daughters of men. Because perhaps, in the end, these mountains are not monuments of creation, but tombs of judgment. They are not only made of stone, they are flesh turned to memory. They are the proof that when God speaks, even the bones of the earth must obey. The mountains melt like wax before the Lord of all the earth. Psalm 97:5. And though millennia have passed since the flood, the mountains still whisper His name. There are mountains on this earth that do not look like mountains at all. Their shapes are too deliberate, their faces too smooth, their tops too flat, as if someone had once taken a blade the size of the heavens and sliced them clean. One of them stands in the heart of Wyoming, rising straight from the plains. A colossal pillar of rock known to science as Devil's Tower. To those who still believe the ancient texts, it is not a tower at all. It is a stump, the remains of a tree that once reached the sky. Legends whispered among the tribes of the plains tell that it was a tree of the old world, cut down by forces from above. Its vertical columns, perfectly aligned like the fibers of wood, spiral upward as if frozen mid-growth. To geologists, these are volcanic formations, basalt cooled in order. But to eyes that have seen the patterns of nature, it is unmistakable. The geometry of life turned to stone. And perhaps it is more than legend. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. Psalm 33:9. When God commands, creation obeys, even when the command is destruction. And before the flood, when corruption filled the world, the command was clear: cut down the works of pride. The book of Enoch, long removed from the canon, yet echoed through generations, speaks of the angels who descended to execute judgment upon the fallen ones. It tells of mighty trees that touched the heavens, symbols of power and arrogance that were felled so that the Nephilim could not climb them to escape the coming waters. Their roots were torn out, and their trunks were cast down into the deep, the text says. Could these monumental pillars, Devil's Tower in America, Table Mountain in South Africa, Mount Connor in Australia, be the remnants of those ancient trees? Their symmetry defies chaos. Their grain runs vertical, like vessels once filled with sap. Their tops are level, as though sawn by design. Even erosion cannot mimic such precision. These were not random hills. They were structures of life, cut off at their peak by something greater than time. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. Isaiah 2:11. That day came when the heavens darkened and the floodgates of the deep were opened. Rain fell, not as blessing, but as sentence. And before the waters rose, the axe of heaven had already fallen. Imagine it. Forests that reached miles high, feeding giants that towered over nations, casting shadows across continents. They were not trees as we know them, but living monuments, arteries of the old world. And when the angels struck them down, the ground itself would have shaken like thunder. The ancients remembered those echoes. They carved their memories into myths, the world trees, the pillars that joined heaven and earth, the sacred trunks worshipped by pagans long after the truth was buried. But Scripture remembers them differently, not as bridges of life, but as altars of rebellion. Because those trees had become sanctuaries for the fallen, towering fortresses where the Nephilim sought to defy judgment. When the flood came, they climbed, but the water rose higher. When they fled to the peaks themselves were cut down. And when the deluge was over, what remained were stumps, mountains that once were trees. Their rings became layers of stone. Their roots became caverns. Their sap turned to minerals that still glow faintly under the sun. No one can hide from my presence. Do I not fill heaven and earth? Jeremiah 23:24. Even the giants could not hide. The flood reached them, and the earth consumed what was left. The forest of rebellion became the graveyard of pride. Today, we walk among those remains. We call them mesas, plateaus, pillars, the silent witnesses of an age when heaven intervened. Some of them still carry scars, circular ridges, spiral grooves, petrified roots extending deep into the crust. And beneath them, fossilized channels trace the flow of something that once pulsed like veins. Geologists may call it coincidence, but the prophets would call it continuity. The same voice that once commanded, "Let there be light," also declared, "Let the proud be brought low." And so they were. The old trees fell, and with them fell the dominion of the giants. The flood erased the world that was, sealing it beneath layers of stone. But the stumps remained, monuments to the day God drew his sword against the rebellion of flesh. He cuts off the spirit of princes. He is terrible to the kings of the earth. Psalm 76:12. Perhaps that is why these formations bear names like Devil's Tower. The world remembers, even if it forgets why. The name itself is a confession that once something unholy stood there, and heaven tore it down. And now, thousands of years later, the earth still tells the story. Every vertical ridge, every hexagonal pattern of basalt, every plateau that ends in a perfect horizontal line, they all whisper the same truth. That pride has limits, and the Creator alone decides where heaven ends and earth begins. So when we look upon these colossal shapes and call them natural wonders, perhaps we are naming the scars of the flood itself, the wounds of a planet that once trembled at the command of its Maker. Because when God intervenes, nothing stands tall for long. Every civilization that has sought to master truth has first learned to bury it. In our age, silence has become the most refined form of control. What cannot be explained is dismissed. What cannot be disproven is hidden. And what cannot be silenced is ridiculed. For decades, explorers have tried to penetrate the forbidden zones of our world, the sealed gates of Antarctica, the restricted valleys of the Grand Canyon, the fenced regions of the Middle East, where ancient stones lie untouched. Each time, they meet the same response: off-limits, restricted, classified. But why? What could possibly be so dangerous beneath the ice or within the canyon walls that entire nations have agreed to conceal it? Some say it is for protection, that the terrain is unstable. Others whisper that beneath the ice lies something not yet dead, a remnant of a world that should not have survived the flood. For there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, nor anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. If Scripture promises revelation, why does man insist on concealment? Across the world, evidence of the pre-flood era has surfaced again and again. Fossilized structures that defy logic, formations that resemble not geology but biology, and traces of human craftsmanship far older than civilization itself. Each discovery is met with the same pattern: a brief report, a swift denial, then silence. The scientific world calls it anomalies. Governments call it classified archaeology. But prophecy calls it remembrance. It is no coincidence that every empire fears what lies beneath. Because what lies beneath could prove that Scripture is not myth, it is memory. And if that truth is ever accepted, the systems built upon denial would crumble overnight. The ancient prophets spoke of this fear long ago. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together, against the Lord and against His anointed. Psalm 2:2. In every age, power seeks to rewrite heaven's narrative. What was once called divine judgment is now labeled natural disaster. What was once the flood of God is now an ice age. And what was once the fall of giants is now erosion. But even the most sophisticated deception cannot erase what the earth remembers. The stones do not lie. They have seen too much. And when you look closely, truly closely at the silent geometry of mountains, you see order where there should be chaos, design where there should be chance, purpose where there should be nothing. That is not coincidence. That is authorship. Scientists measure time in eons. Prophets measure it in covenants. And somewhere between the two lies the truth that the world fears most, that we are living atop the ruins of a divine judgment and calling it progress. Science tries to explain everything through reason, yet every time they name a mountain, they unknowingly touch a monument of God. Every layer of stone they examine is a page of Genesis, written in ash and blood. The silence of empires is not ignorance, it is intention. They know that if the world remembers what the earth still holds, the illusion of control will dissolve. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Psalm 118, verse 22. The builders of today, the scientists, the rulers, the systems, reject the very stone that holds their foundation. They do not see that the rejected truths of Scripture are the same stones that uphold the mountains they walk upon. Yet truth, like pressure, always finds a way to surface. When the time comes, it will rise again, not as myth, but as revelation. Because the earth cannot stay silent forever. The very ground trembles for the day when it will testify once more. And when that day comes, when the glaciers melt and the deserts split, history will be rewritten not by pen, but by the voice of creation itself. When he opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. Revelation 6:12. The silence of empires will end the moment the earth begins to speak, and when it does, no power on earth will be able to deny that what man called myth was, in truth, the memory of God. There will come a day when the silence breaks, not by man, not by science, but by the earth itself. The mountains that stood still will begin to tremble. The valleys that hid their secrets will rise and speak. For creation has never forgotten what it witnessed: the fall of angels, the rebellion of flesh, and the flood that erased a world that thought it could defy heaven. The earth mourns and fades away. The world languishes and fades away. The haughty people of the earth do languish. Isaiah 24:4. These are not just words of prophecy. They are the memory of the ground we walk upon. Every stone, every grain of salt, every mountain peak bears the mark of an age that once was. A time when giants roamed, when the sons of God took the daughters of men, and when the Creator himself intervened to reset the balance of existence. And yet, mankind has learned nothing. We build towers to heaven once again. We chase immortality through science, through power, through knowledge, forgetting that the last civilization who did so was swallowed by the sea. Perhaps that is why the earth stirs again. Perhaps that is why the old patterns return. Rivers drying where prophecy said they would, mountains cracking where none should, and strange lights appearing in the heavens like messengers of remembrance. The signs are not new. They are ancient, repeating themselves as the final cycle begins. Because prophecy is not prediction, it is repetition. History moves in circles, and God writes in echoes. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world. Matthew 24:21. If the giants of the first age fell under the weight of divine judgment, what will become of a generation that denies even the existence of its maker? The earth will remember. And when it does, no government, no empire, no scientist will silence it. The stones will cry out, and the rivers will reveal what they've been hiding. The mountains will crumble, not in chaos, but in testimony, because every act of creation is also an act of memory, and the world we inhabit is not merely the stage of history, but the grave of a forgotten covenant. So when you look upon the ancient hills, remember, they were not born only of time, but of judgment. And if the earth once bore witness to the fall of the mighty, it will bear witness once more, when the Son of Man returns. And the ground itself will stand to testify that the word was true. They can hide the bones of the giants, but they cannot hide God.